Hello, 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 world. Welcome to NBT at Home, your home away from home. This is an extension of the National Black Theater's 51st season titled Beyond Walls. This is a 5-part conversation series with the creative community of NBT, and I'm your host, ChelseaDee. I'm an associate producer and co-curator with the National Black Theater, and here with me are some very, very, very out of this planet artists. Here with us, we have Justin Hicks. Justin Hicks, I'm just gonna big you up. I'm reading like the first line from your bio, but like the bios on these two folks right here, crazy. Google, get into it. It's gonna give you life. But Justin Hicks is a composer, performer, collaborator with notable visual artists, musicians, and theater makers. He is a multidisciplinary artist and performer who uses music and sound to investigate identity and value. What? Crazy. And our other guest is Carl Hancock Rux, an American poet, playwright, novelist, essayist, actor, director, singer, songwriter, hats, all of the hats. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for joining us today. Yeah. We're going to be talking about Afrofuturism, the artist's Sun Ra, and the question of what is the story of your joyful noise? And don't worry, we'll get more into what that is about. But I want to hear more about these artists. I'm sure that you do as well. So Justin and Carl, here are our check-in questions for the evening right here. Just give us your name, give us some project updates or something that you're working on, what you're up to now, what's fascinating you. And the question is, what is bringing joy to you right now? And what does joy sound like? I'm going to type this into our chat here for you to reference in case.
I'll start. I'm working on finishing a novel of a sort of historical dystopian fiction, if that makes any sense.
Nice.
And, I just released an EP from a live concert that I did at Joe's Pub, which was celebrating the beginning of Joe's Pub because I was the first artist who ever performed there. So, I was the inaugural performer 20 years ago. And
wow.
And then not only was I the inaugural performer 20 years ago, but then I was also a curator at Joe's Pub. So I introduced lots of artists to Joe's Pub, like Reagon and Tamar Kali and a bunch of other people. So I did a live concert with a bunch of artists, and it was a live recording. And the EP just came out, which is called Anima Animus, and available everywhere music is sold. And I'm working on a bunch of other projects, but let's just stop there.
Nice. And what's bringing you joy right now? What is what's keeping you uplifted? What's keeping you?
That's an interesting question. The idea of joy. I mean,
yeah.
And I do believe in joy. Mm-hmm. I had someone say something really wise to me one time, a long time ago, that sometimes in moments of crisis, which we have to all acknowledge, actually, that right now in America, we are in a moment of crisis, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, we're in a crisis state. And sometimes it is difficult to find happiness or joy. But what I have been able to find is, I guess, a sense of stillness and well-being. I'm if that makes sense. I'm content to be healthy. I'm content to have my own home. I'm content to be in my home. I'm content to know that the people I love and that I'm really connected to are still here and still available to me, whether or not I can touch them physically. Mm-hmm. That I don't need to touch them physically in order to believe that they exist, or that they have my back, or that I have theirs. Mm-hmm. I also have a certain kind of calm, I guess, in knowing that I've been through several crises before, not personal necessarily, but I mean national. I mean, on a national level. I mean, there have been, well, for the last 4 years, we've been in a national crisis. But I mean, just but as an African American male, there are crises that I've experienced within my lifetime, and crises that my ancestors have experienced, and we've all come through them. And that brings me a certain kind of solace to believe this is just another moment. Whether I survive it physically or not is not the point for me. I'm not saying that I don't want to survive it. I'm just saying that it doesn't have to be the objective. The objective for me is to know that my soul is continuous, that our DNA is continuous, that our mission is continuous, that we exist, that we will always exist, and that we will all move beyond this moment that we are in right now. So that brings me solace.
I love it. I mean, there's just so many threads in there, but we're gonna get to threading and weaving and braiding and all that. But thank you for that. Thank you, Justin. Check-in questions.
Yeah. So wow.
Yeah.
Joy. I think for me right now is a combination of just, I think the contrast between the bright moments and the dark moments is really heightened for me right now. I've gone through the past 2 months. I've experienced great loss, physical pain, and with that, the other side of it ended up being this kind of self-care thing that I, for a long time, was not necessarily skeptical of, but I was not a loud and proud kind of participant in that movement, I'll even say, and like calling it out and saying my self-help, like even owning like that notion for myself. And it really gets down to these really tiny moments, like seeing colors a certain way now, smelling things that I'm cooking. I used to be a chef, and I stopped cooking for a long time just because I got too busy and I don't work that way anymore and all this stuff. And I kind of being like forced to really be strategic about your meals in a way that I wasn't for a while. I actually have been getting a lot of pleasure out of that. And quite frankly, joy. It makes me feel good, and it gives me joy, but it also gives me a certain kind of confidence that there is this tool that I have that will allow me to, quite frankly, sometimes create something out of nothing for myself and my wife. Like having that gives me joy. It makes you feel strong. And I think those are like the day-to-day things that are really kind of pushing me along. But I think in terms of joy and relating to the things I'm working on, I'm working a lot right now on trying to create work that does that can sit in a space, this strange digital space even, in a way that doesn't lose kind of potency, like whether that's poetic or whether that's sonic. There are a lot of parameters around everyone saying, oh, now this changes how theater or live performance is going to be made, and and really I come from a DIY living room musician kind of past, or that's how I kind of was reared early on being in New York. And I think getting back to that, I see a lot of possibility. And so I've been reconfiguring some works that I finished, but not really finished, and kind of massaging them into this other format that's showing me that you can kind of, I guess it's a matter of how much you want to try to, kind of shove or wedge something old into a new space. And I think along with the, this conversation we're about to have, I think there's always something about reimagining something that exists, whether that's something you've created or not, and seeing it now, and especially something that's useful both as a concept and as a technology. I think that's that's something that's giving me a lot of like eagerness to explore and kind of explore even my early kind of makings. That's kind of like a combo answer for both those questions, I guess.
Thank you.
A combo.
Yes, this is great. I mean, y'all are planting so many seeds that I think will bloom over the course of this conversation. Planting of the seeds. And I start with this question about joy because, and I so appreciate, Carl, you really bringing this into really sharp focus of we are in a crisis state. I mean, every day, every hour on the hour, the ante is getting upped. The stakes are being raised. There's some new development in this that could really easily make a person feel like just the mental load, the psychological, the psychic, the spiritual load of this moment is enough to break people. And so I appreciate you all finding some resonance in this idea of joy and how it can be a useful tool for us because we need it. We need it. Great. So thinking about this idea of, Carl, you brought up like ancestral survival and how we are moving forward. In our first conversation as part of this series, ChelseaDee, the CEO of the National Black Theater, was talking about how we have a choice in how we rise and how we choose to respond to these moments. And we have a plethora of ways in which we can do that, but we can never choose fear. And so what today's conversation, I wanted to focus it around joy as the prospect of that being a radical tool in and of itself, as something that we could lean to provide some roadmap for us. So thank you for answering those questions. Let's get into a little bit of why we're here today and like what this thing is, why we have gathered here today. So originally this was part of a series of programming that was going to happen at the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Life, Black Culture. And so we have a partnership with the Schomburg Center, and we were able to go into their archives and just get to play within those archives at the Schomburg Center and choose artists that relate to their theme for the season of Black travel. So NBT's response to the Schomburg Center's theme of Black travel was, well, what about the Black body traveling forward, traveling beyond this moment right here? And I think this relates to this idea of ancestral survival, this idea of how we are going to move forward, what we are going to take with us, how we do it with cool and ease and Africanist presence, and what does that mean? What does that look like? And so that's what NBT is diving into, this conversation of Afrofuturism. What is Afrofuturism? And what I've learned in observation of things that I've seen in the archives at the Schomburg Center, Afrofuturism has to deal with, and Justin and Carl, I want to get your opinion on this as well. Afrofuturism having to do with Black people in a global Pan-African sense of Blackness, Black people imagining a place beyond now, a place beyond this moment. And that can take many different forms. It can be literary, it can be fashion, it can be food, it can be music, it can be art. I mean, there's so many things that Afrofuturism can manifest as, because there's just so many wonderful shades and mixes and types of Blackness. So that is the frame of Afrofuturism. But I want to check in with y'all. Justin, Carl, maybe Justin, you can start us off. What are your thoughts on Afrofuturism, and does it have any impact on your work?
It's interesting. I think up until about 5 years ago, no one was really referencing any of the work I was doing as Afrofuturistic or as being related to Afrofuturism. I think it had a moment there where people were really like trying to connect a group of artists of color, particularly Black artists, making work that didn't seem what I would call, I have this horrible joke about what is expected of us in terms of, especially in theater land. And I think there's been like a school of Black theater creators and designers and makers who are pushing us out of the kind of sepia, brown, heavily historically referenced kind of visuals And I think this idea of Afrofuturism became like a way to get people situated together and kind of create this like, okay, there's a group of people, there's a handful of people, or maybe this is a bigger than, a small set of makers thing. So for me, I still see it as an idea that I'm not necessarily that I'm participating in on purpose, but I think it's almost like there is a default futurist aspect to every movement in music and art that has been kind of ushered in by Black people. There's always a future and always a new and next. Things get old to us quickly, but we are eager to reminisce. And I think there's something really that constant looking backward to forward. That's always a thing. Even just the simple act of, I think a lot about sampling because I have a very tricky relationship with sampling. I describe it as tricky in that, I have hands and I can create sounds that have not been made before, perhaps. But even still, if I create a set or a library of my own sounds and I choose to sample one of those sounds for something today, and I made that sound even perhaps yesterday, there is always this aspect of taking something and putting it into a new time. And I think that's part of, this thing that maybe I was raised with, that is a lot of us were raised with, which is use what you have, but also reimagine it, reconfigure it, maybe whittle it down a little bit, maybe repeat it, maybe make a couple more of them and see what you have and see how it's useful. I think there's something about, even in the kind of fantastic nature of a lot of visuals that we associate with Afrofuturism, there's something that is completely practical and reasonable as well, which I find is under kind of, I think it's not discussed as much when we talk about these aesthetics. Like there's a practicality to all of it. And that's something in particular with Sun Ra's work, there's a reason why that's that color. You know what I mean? There's a reason why everything is like working and cooking the way it is. I really imagine usefulness. And,
it's not a decorative, purely theoretical thing. It has a daily use and purpose.
Exactly.
Fantastic. And we're definitely gonna explore some DIY fashion. We're gonna explore some reconfiguring what you got to get what you want. We're gonna talk a little bit about that in just a moment. But Carl, talk to us. What are your ideas around Afrofuturism? Does it have any influence in your work?
Sure. I mean, well, definitely different from Justin. I mean, I have been, contextualized or written about as an Afrofuturist, especially with, I think, my first novel, which was called Asphalt, and there was people were bantering that word around at the time. The book came out in 2004 on Simon & Schuster, and people. I guess I wrote a book without knowing that, or without intentionally knowing that I was creating fiction that would be contextualized as Afrofuturist. But what I've learned is that I was making a mistake, and by not understanding myself as an Afrofuturist. And the mistake that I guess I was making was an existential mistake. The existential mistake is that most of us think, both existential and aesthetic, most of us think that Afrofuturism is really about science fiction. And, we're not talking about, and so we're not talking about a fiction, and we're not always necessarily talking about science, but we are talking about future, right? We're talking about, so in that sense, I am an Afrofuturist in the same way that you are an Afrofuturist, because you are the descendant of someone, right? And Justin is the descendant of someone, right? And the way that he sings, or the way that he embodies the world, or the way that Justin walks through the world is not going to be the exact way that his father or his mother or his forefathers or foremothers actually walked through the world. So we actually become Afrofuturists, whether we want to or not, just by our, just by our state of being. and the continuity of being. That's one thing I think I've learned to embrace Afrofuturism as a state of understanding my existence as, you know, an extension of something that was and is no more, and that continues to be. And every breath, every word, every sound that I put out into this environment, even before I put it out, is the next thing, right? Even before I conceive it, that is Afrofuturism. So I embrace it. I do embrace it, and I dismiss my earlier concepts of Afrofuturism as a science fiction. You know, it's not Twilight Zone, right?
Yeah.
It's not a Black Twilight Zone. It's not necessarily about Black spaceships. It can be, you know. I mean, that it can be that, and that's fine. But but you know, in order to really understand the ingredients, I think, of anything that is to come, we have to understand all of the ingredients of what was and what's available to us, right? So we have to really have a sense of, I mean, I really consider myself a keen investigator of history and a lover of history. And, you know, I can never get enough of exploring. I'm nosy. I'm really nosy. You know, like Zora Neale Hurston said, you know, that anthropology was, what did she say? It was poking and prying with a purpose. You know, so I really consider myself someone who pokes and pries with a purpose and pries into the past as a way to envision a present or even accept the present and to look toward a future. And so that could be a political future, it could be a personal future, it could be an existential future, a future of love, a future of relationships, a future of economics, all those things come to play and come into fore. But we can't really get there until we know, until we really look at all the things that we've had. So what am I really talking about? I guess what I'm really talking about is something that one of my mentors, one of many people's mentors, said to me years ago that stays with me. The person I'm talking about is Dr. Bernice Reagon, who is an anthropologist and who's a gospel singer, right? And we were in Europe and we were creating work. And she just said this, and I remember it verbatim because it was so profound, which was, there comes a time in your life when you discover an emptiness. You have no thought of yourself as being empty, and you've been operating as if you were not. But it is there, this emptiness. And the moment that you discover your emptiness, nothing bothers you as much as your emptiness, except your yearning to be full. And that's when, for the first time in your life and the first time with your life, you search for a tongue, a language, a means of articulation. So for me, Afrofuturism is really about articulation. It is about language, always. And I don't just mean about having a conversation. I mean, everything is a conversation. Embracing someone is a conversation. You know, how I treat you, how I interact with you is a conversation. How I choose not to vote for you is a conversation. You know, how I choose to not participate in a certain kind of, you know, ology that no longer works and it is no longer working for me and it's no longer working for my people is a conversation. And that articulation, the finessing of that constant the finessing of that constant articulation is my satisfying my own yearning to be full and reaching toward what is next and what is to come. So that's what Afrofuturism means to me. Articulation. Yearning to be full.
Fantastic. I mean, I just really appreciate this nuanced understanding of Afrofuturism as something beyond science fiction, something beyond just a literary moment. This is a tool. This is a lens. This is a frame. And being able to imagine a future, particularly in an oppressive society or societal construct, is a radical act in and of itself. So,
I mean, if you don't mind me saying, it's just like for someone who's a lover of literature, I mean, and I mentioned her before, like Zora Neale Hurston. I mean, I think Zora Neale Hurston was certainly an Afrofuturist. I mean, but she was an Afrofuturist who studied folklore and who studied, all about, who studied anthropology and who, and who embraced, our folkisms, right? But then, she could write a novel like Their Eyes Were Watching God, which actually imagined, in a tangible and beautiful way, imagined a Black feminist principle, a Black feminist theory of being, of a woman whose hair is free and who's got on, overalls and who's returned from, having killed her man, right? Who she loved and loved only, but he was, he'd been infected. TK had been infected, right? I mean, he'd been infected by a disease, and so she had to kill him. But that didn't mean that she didn't love him. And she'd actually come through life having known many men and men who had not loved her. And so here she is, and she's alone, and she's by herself. And so it's that as the book begins with understanding love as the sanctum of a bloom, which is also the sanctum of a future. The sanctum of a next, the sanctum of a now moving into a next. So yeah, I think that we do ourselves an incredible disservice when we think of Afrofuturism as some like, spaceology thing. And that is not to say that space, time, travel has nothing to do with Afrofuturism, but it is not the totality of it at all.
Yeah,
yes.
I think along with those lines, I feel like the conversation about technology and almost all music right now, whether you're playing folk, if you're dealing in recorded music or even live performance, where you plug anything in, you're already dealing with like a lot of bells and whistles. What I mean? You did to see Sweet Honey in the Rock a cappella. They're already dealing with bells and whistles. They have to fill up a room that's impossible to fill up in a certain way. There's already this engagement with technology, but I think there's also for me and thinking about usage and thinking about purpose. I also find that being skeptical of technology is also like this thing. And like you were saying, it's not all about like, of course, I love a good vocal effect, and I will use one. It's not always about that. It's like sometimes it's like, well, I don't need any instruments. I just need to make the voice sound away. I don't need this or I don't need that. You know what I mean? What is the real totality of the technology? And actually, I think of Afrofuturism as an atmosphere too, that it kind of separates the useful from the decorative. I think a lot about how music right now almost all sounds like I don't want to say all music, but a lot of the pop music that you hear on the radio, top 40, even some like kind of underground R&B, like that people would kind of consider Afrofuturist. When it is considered, when it's used as an aesthetic, it still can work and be productive in the right hands, but it also makes itself very clear when you see it happening and when you see, this whoever pop star young lady is using this producer or trying to get this particular sound. It runs into like a true false kind of thing. Is this real or not? Because of the purpose and the usage. I think that a lot of things can sound good, or they can sound like possibility or like a future of, but when it's purposed in a certain way, or it's purposed for us or by us, it's a different thing. And I think it's very exposing for me. Like, I listen to a lot of different kinds of music. That's such a whack thing to say, but I think there is a sameness even amongst and it has a lot to do with the flattening of like technology being kind of utilized in the same way amongst so many acts and perspectives. I mean, it can be seen as a lovely thing, but it's also kind of like I became skeptical of that. And so I'm really interested in sometimes dead technology, or technology that's not supposed to work anymore, or the one piece of gear that does everything I need it to do, and not necessarily thinking I need a hot rod to create an impressionable piece of sound work, or an important moment in time. That's really what we're dealing with. You know, when you're doing a spoken piece, if you're singing, if you're dealing with anything time-based, that's all we're doing. We're trying to shift the focus during a period of time, you know, whether that's like 5 minutes, or whether it's like a long form. No, I need to be here 20 minutes to make sure that this 20 minutes is right for me. And hopefully it'll give you something that you can make another 20 minutes work for you.
Right.
I think that's part of this purpose that I feel that's when I'm creating. It's like, okay, especially right now, you know, about joy. It's like, well, you know, I don't think I have it in me to complain in front of a bunch of people. I have a lot of things I could probably complain about, but I think right now, and when you were asking the question about how we can use joy and like utilize joy as something that we can like hold, like when you say it's a choice,
it's a material resource.
It is a technology. The way we utilize joy as creators, as Black creators, is a technology. And sometimes it just doesn't need this. It's just, you know, it doesn't.
That's right. Is.
You know,
that's right. It's a technology and a resource that is not always necessarily outside of ourselves.
Right.
I mean, it doesn't necessarily have to be something that's plugged in. You know, even just, which is one of the reasons why I guess I appreciate people like Dr. Reagon, because, you know, I mean, you Justin, you were talking about making sound, right, and using vocal effects. But, you know, here's a woman who, you know, really came into, I love that she said, you know, not until the civil rights movement she'd been singing all her life, but not until she really got really involved on the front lines of the civil rights movement, had she finally heard her voice, you know, the way that she has now. You know, she had not, I think she says, you know, and until the moment that she really got involved in the civil rights movement, she had not really heard herself sing. You know, not the voice that we hear her sing with now. And the voice that we hear her sing with now is a voice that actually accesses, if you know her as a singer, or even if you know her as a teacher, or even if you just appreciate her as an artist, the voice that she uses is a voice that accesses many different sounds. We've always done that and used sound and sent sound into the air in different ways in order to achieve different purposes. And that itself becomes its own future. So these technologies, right, actually are not necessarily always outside of us. You know, they don't have to be the thing that's invented or the thing, you know, with you know, through electricity and through wire. Can be, and there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, it's beautiful, and I'm with you. I love a good vocal effect. But you know, but we've been affecting our vocals for centuries and centuries and affecting our minds and affecting our attitudes and our intellectual consciousness for years.
Yeah. This is, I mean, can't think of a better segue to Sun Ra and thinking about this sound, thinking about utilizing sound, thinking about this voice coming out of you, this sound coming out of you that you'd never heard before that suddenly brings forth something new. A quote from the film Sun Ra, a Joyful Noise documentary film. Sun Ra has a quote where he says, "The neighbors complained about the music and police came to my house. I told them it's not music, it's a joyful noise." And a little bit about Sun Ra. Sun Ra, an American jazz composer, band leader, piano and synthesizer player, thinking about the technology, new technologies, a poet, and also a metaphysical philosopher. I want to take this moment and give some appreciation to Sun Ra's fashion and Sun Ra's influence in fashion, and the DIY, using what you have in this current moment to envision something for yourself in the future. So let me just pull this up. Let me share my screen. Let's see. Here we go. Okay. So let's just take a moment to appreciate just the combinations of things that we're putting together and that we're seeing in the fashion of Sun Ra. metallic sequence, good. Color, good. Just layers. And I love that. I love the band. Check out the orchestra who was like, yeah, we are joining in creating this look for ourselves. And we are all agreeing that this is the place to be. I just want to take a second to appreciate the fact that, let me make sure my screen is, to just appreciate what Sun Ra was bringing to the fashion game. All right, moving on. Let's go into our second round of questions here. And then we're probably going to have to move into asking some questions or taking some questions from our Facebook Live chat. But I wanted to give you all just a second. Justin, I know that you had something to maybe share or give us a peek into something that you're working on at the moment.
There's a piece that I've been making with my family, actually. My wife, Kenita, and my sister, Jade, we have a group called the Hot Plates, and we've been Jade is now in Indianapolis with my mother. She's my mother's caretaker right now. So a lot of our work has taken place over the airways,
technologies.
This technology. But we created a song cycle a few years ago that dealt with a lot of the vocabularies around progress and gentrification and all these things. But it was really kind of steeped in ambiguous language and kind of came back up for us recently. And we're starting to mess with the material for kind of new forms and new media. But I guess I can share just like a little bit of that.
Okay. I'm here for it.
And we'll see kind of what happens with that. So... Meet me a battlefield. This is a dream, not sand. Missing the mistress. So let's just be what's good. What we will want, we should have this or never. Happy to be mine. Happy to be myself. Happy to hold this shelf. Hell or whatever. So I'm kindly bringing. Kindly bring it. Kindly bring it. While I was driving, forming a dirt stew. Later in the center of town where I grew, drive through. Where will I sleep tonight? I'm worrying and worried 'cause my shoes are dying. Children are younger and faster than the ones I knew. Drive through, drive What's in the cards for you? I heard you threw too many dances down. Well, I did too. Leave the battlefield. This is a dream, not sand. Missing the mistress. So let's just be what's good. What's good? What's good? It's not completely broken. So let's just be what's good. What's good? What's
Wow. That was great. Wow. I mean, it just really, there was like a place beyond time that you were sonically creating that was like so evocative for me. So evocative. Thank you for sharing that.
Pleasure.
Thank you. Can you talk a little bit about your production process? Like how are you creating these sounds? What is the technology that you're using?
Sure. I think of everything as what I want to mess around. Like I kind of continue to build a library of sounds, as well as concepts and perhaps some lyrics that I'm able to kind of call upon. It's almost like telling a favorite story or pieces of favorite stories, or, I grew up, my father was a preacher. So kind of having like notes all the time that I can access and reference, and kind of pull together, either through improvisation or like quick composition sometimes, in a way, like what's useful right now. So that's kind of how I build everything. I think sonically I'm really adventurous. So um, a lot of those sounds that are in this particular like set of this library of sounds are purposed for this particular lyrical material, and for the conceptual material too. But it's often that I will sing that passage with a different beat or a different sound, or perhaps with nothing. And I sang through a lot of text that actually was broken up into 3 different voices originally, and we've played those songs we play them differently every time we perform them. So I think there's also something about that. And when you talk about time, for me, part of me is kind of shooting for something that feels pre-recorded music, or that possibility that this future already happened in the past, maybe, and I'm kind of trying to fool myself even into believing that it's a different time than it possibly is, And I think that there's also a kind of a wandering that I enjoy kind of putting out there because of not just because of this reason, but I do find myself always kind of at odds with a very focused and formulated sense of song, which is useful. And it's actually one of my favorite things to hear is sometimes it's like A, B, A, B, C, A, B,
Mm-hmm.
But I think for a certain type of attention, meandering a little bit, letting the voice have its say in what it wants to play, similarly to a jazz solo, but as this kind of the focal point. I think it allows people to drift with music a little bit more than having to play to it or exist to it. It's kind of like there to be a little bit of a bed or an atmosphere, even verbally, that people can like draw certain connections, or they can just, quite frankly, I'm into people being able to just cool out and veg out a little bit sometimes, you know, but knowing that there is a real purpose and a quality of intellect that goes into what I'm trying to write.
Absolutely, atmospheric is such a wonderful descriptor. And was Carl? Was there anything that you wanted to share as well, or if not, I have a question for you.
Well, just that was. I mean, yeah. I mean, I not only did I love it, I mean, it was incredible. It was, you know, I think that is the, you know, again, it's this. That's the sort of what I think. I love that Justin said that he was, you know, in creating this music or in creating this work, he was, you know, as opposed to trying to create something new, he was actually trying to create something that already existed, but he hadn't necessarily heard before, you know, which is, you know, something that might have been past that you might not have been privy to. And that strikes me all the time. Even when you put up the images of Sun Ra, you know, it's, you know, I think that's actually what he was doing. You know, I think that what he was doing was he was imagining, you know, an Egyptology, or he was imagining an Afrocentric Egyptology that absolutely divorced us from the kind of Western Egyptology that we'd been given, which really wasn't even an Egyptology, right? The Elizabeth Taylor as, you know, queen, you know, coming in on the Nile, but actually putting us back in center, front and center of our own continent or space or universe, right? And then trying to reconnect to what you see in hieroglyphs and what you see on the walls and what you see in the art. And in that way, since you can't actually get those, you know, materials anymore, meaning you can't necessarily find the exact thread that perhaps, you know, people might have used, or you might not know exactly how they wove, you know, that thread into a certain kind of a silk or fabric. You can only try to imagine it and try to activate it for yourself. And in that activating it, it becomes your interpretation of what was as a way of looking for what is going to be next and what should be next. And, you know, I think that's my greatest sort of understanding, I think, of what Sun Ra was doing. It's of what Justin was doing, allowing us to just go to an internal place, because before we knew anything about AB, or before we knew anything about chords, we were singing. Before we knew anything about Western composition, we were singing and making music. Before we knew anything about putting these little notes on pages, you know, necessarily, or the way in which Europeans have taught us actually to, you know, write out music, we were creating music and composing music, and we had songs that traveled through time and have been sustainable and lasted, you know, through centuries. And so, and were pre-recorded. Mm-hmm. And so in order to try to access that, you have to get into the headspace of deconstructing what you've been told is, you know, absolutely the way to do a thing, right? And then go toward an internal place of, you know, of what your, you know, the way that your blood beats, so that you can actually articulate your voice. And it was gorgeous.
And beautiful, beautiful segue into kind of our last question, our final thoughts that I want to hear from you all. I mean, it's almost 6:30. I mean, what is time? What is time? So, but my last question that I would really love to get your thoughts around from both of you is, what does post-quarantine look like?
Wow.
Life.
You know, it's hard for me to say, you know, like, you know, Carl was saying earlier, he's lived, like, as a Black male, as a Black anyone, we've been kind of in this weird in and out of quarantine anyway for a long time. It's hard for me to say things are going to be different. I know for me personally, I have made an effort to make myself healthier through this time while I'm dealing with just myself and my body and my other loved person here. Like really, hopefully when I'm able to really meet up with my people next, my friends and my family, I will be a little bit healthier. That's what I've been doing. I can't say, I can make political projections and like a projection about how we will feel. Part of me feels like due to a particular kind of, whether it's strength or wisdom or technology of joy or whatnot, part of me feels like a bunch of us are going to be like, this ain't no thing compared to what the last hundreds of years have been. Like, you know what I mean? This is a moment. It's a blink. So, and what I would like to say though is what gives me joy right now is a space like NBT, spaces where other people are giving us time to even just talk about these things. It's not like it's just now happening because of quarantine. They've always been happening. And I think that's part of that joy thing, So hopefully we continue. We will continue to do that. And that's post everything. That was post 9/11. That was post, it's going to be post Trump too. That's the biggest trauma for me. Right. Honestly.
Beyond that.
Yeah.
All right, Carl, talk to us. What do you think?
I don't know. I think that every step that we take is a movement forward. I was born in Harlem, and I was born in Harlem in the area that I was born in Harlem. It was an incredibly impoverished neighborhood, and it was very dire. Where I lived, how we lived, and the time and space in which we, meaning African-American people within that community, how we were living at that time was very bleak. But we survived it and we moved beyond it. And I survived it and moved beyond it. But that doesn't mean that I ever forgot it and ever can forget it. And it also doesn't mean that just because I survived it, that I don't rely upon it. Because I do rely upon it. I rely upon my brokenness in order to find my healing. And so I hope that post-quarantine will mean that we will constantly rely upon the bodies that we bury, and we will rely upon the people who become sick, or even our own sickness, that we will rely upon this moment that, for better or for worse, has us feeling lonely or isolated, or maybe even some days feeling sad, or feeling like the world will never be the same again, that we will rely upon this, the darkness in order to get to the light. And the light is not the light for me, in my mind. The light never means there is no struggle. The light doesn't mean that on the other side of this, the struggle ends and that it's over. I don't believe the struggle is ever over, not as long as we live and breathe. But I do think that we learn to fight. We learn to struggle better. We learn to, hopefully, we learn lessons from the past, and we learn how to get through, and how to push forward. So post quarantine, for me, will be life.
Yeah, it will continue. Well, thank you to the both of you so much for joining me today. This was such a huge topic, and it's the first of got two more conversations that are going to focus on Afrofuturism. So I think y'all really helped nicely set a tone of how we're going to be approaching Afrofuturism. So thank you very much. And Justin, thank you for sharing your work with us. Really, really transporting. Folks, we are going to wrap up for today. If you want to know what's happening with NBT, go to our website, sign up for our mailing list, follow us on IG, and if you can Support us with donations. Support us with sharing this event on Facebook pages, sharing this event on Instagram pages, letting people know what we're doing. Come, ask questions. Let's be a resource to each other. We're thinking about communal resilience. How are we going to get through this? The statistics that are coming out around African Americans being disproportionately affected by this COVID-19 is a culmination of a lot of issues that have been compounded at this moment. So how can we really come together and use each other as a resource to get beyond this place? We have a choice in how we rise. Let's never choose fear. And perhaps joy is a tool for something radical to happen next. Thank you for joining us at NBT at Home. I'm ChelseaDee, and be well. Stay strong.
Thank you. You're so awesome.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure.
Absolutely.
Good to see you, Carl.
Yeah, and I hope post-quarantine also means I get to collaborate with you one day.
Yeah, that would be great. I was thinking that